Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and this episode marks the beginning of Season 6. This season, I will release new episodes every 3 weeks or so, and I will try to focus mostly on current events that are happening and unfolding in Palestine, in Israel, and around Jerusalem indeed. Today, my guest is Maurcio Lapchik. Mauricio is the Director of External Relations of Peace Now, Shalom Akshav. Peace Now is the largest and longest-standing Israeli movement advocating for peace through public pressure. Under the mission of arriving at peace agreements between Israel and its neighbors, Peace Now currently works to ensure Israelis embrace the only viable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict: two states, meaning the creation of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Peace Now's activities include demonstrations, call for actions, lectures, debates, tours, public campaigns, and more. But today with Mauricio, we're going to unpack how all of these activities have been influenced by the war in Gaza and what peace means today to Israeli, and how the mission of Shalom Akshav, Peace Now, has been influenced by the current context. But before we delve into all of this, Mauricio, welcome.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you for having me. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Okay, Mauricio, can you tell us something about yourself first, but also I'm interested in how did you become the Director of External Relations of Peace Now, Shalom Akshav?
Well, first of all, I was born in Uruguay, in South America. I'm 33 years old. I moved to Israel when I was 21. I grew up in a very strong Jewish and Zionist community where we were taught from the very beginning, from a very early age, that Israel is also our home. I had the chance to visit Israel in many times before I decided to move here. And then in 2013, after finishing some period on my young movement, it was a Zionist young movement in Uruguay, I decided to move to Israel to actually to study here at the Hebrew University, where I did my BA and my MA on political science and comparative religion. And then slowly, I'll not say immediately after, but some months and years after moving here, I started to realize that there is an issue, that is a situation that is very different from what it was depicted to us, even though I had the chance to see it and to read about it. It's not that I didn't know anything. It's not that I thought that Israel is the perfect place for every Jew to live. I knew about this, but seeing this with my own eyes, especially in Jerusalem, took me to a position where I started to become very critical about the current situation, about the occupation, about the way that our country is being led by our political leadership, and slowly started to become an activist. I will always follow the work of my organization of Peace Now and many others, but it was actually nothing that I planned. It's actually something that, because I was in the middle of my PhD, then there was an open position here at Peace Now, and this is how I slowly enter also to this field. And after a couple of months, I became the Director of External Relations, and the rest is history.
And before we delve into some more specific questions, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about Peace Now Shalom Akshav. So what it stands for and how things have changed since October 7, 2023, for you personally in terms of your work, but also for the organization.
Well, for everyone who does not know Peace Now is the largest and longest standing Israeli movement advocating for peace through public pressure in Israel. It was founded in 1978, and there is a very interesting fact that actually the movement was founded by officers from the army. And back then, in 78, they were calling to Prime Minister Begin to keep pushing, or to push Prime Minister Begin to finally reach an agreement with the Egyptians, with Anwar Sadat, something that happened the year after that. So this was the first big victory for this movement, which after that started to focus more on the situation in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza as well, and with the possibility of a peace agreement with the Palestinians. In the early 90s, the movement identified in a systematic way, not only through different protests, but it identified the way to struggle against the settlement movement. And that's when Peace Now established what is our most successful project that is called Settlement Watch. That the idea is to analyze, research, and exposure and monitor as well all the settlement developments in order to stop this illegal activity. Our Settlement Watch team is internationally acclaimed for its credibility, reliability as well, and is being quoted also since many years, and also now by international media, Israeli media, governments, and many more. What happened since the Oslo Accords till now is actually, I believe, it's a reflection from what had happened with the Israeli society. And I will give only one example, the use of the term peace. In the 90s, this was something widely accepted by the Israeli society. It was a good word, had a very important role in the public discourse. But since the 90s and since Netanyahu took power till now, what we see is actually quite the opposite. You cannot use the word peace, shalom, as we say here. So we at least have a reminder that every day or every time that we go to work, to remember that peace is still a possibility. I will not say that currently most of the people here in Israel believe that, but it is important to keep this word as part of the public narrative. I will also say a few words about what happened before and after the 7th of October. And in order to understand what is our situation right now, we also need to go back to what happened in December 2022, when this government, led by Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir, took power. And what happened after it was what is known as the judicial overhaul that actually generated the biggest protest movement in the history of this country. Weeks after week, day after day, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Israelis went out to protest against the plans that this government had and still have to destroy what remains from Israeli democracy. One of the things that was ignored during all that year, during 2023 till the 7th of October and after, is the core issue, what we believe, that is the core issue, that is the occupation. And if we take a look at the names and main leaders of this anti-democratic movement, we can easily connect these names with the source of these anti-democratic moves, that is the settlements in the West Bank. You can think about Ben Gvir, who lives in Kiryat Arba, next to Hebron. You can think about Simcha Rothman, one of the architects of the judicial overhaul, who lives in what is today a settlement, but what it was a couple of years ago, an illegal outpost in Bnei Kedem, Smotrich, Orit Struk, and many, many others. For our movement, this was of course, the 7th of October and what came after, the biggest challenge we had, probably in our history, and for sure as for many here in this country. Because on the one hand, we were saying that if we do not address the core issue, the conflict and the occupation of the Palestinian people, this will explode. And the 7th of October is the way that this explode in our face. If we, instead of keep managing the conflict, that is probably the most dangerous approach that we have, and this is what our government, not only this last government, but many other governments before, including the Coalition for Change and including other governments that were not necessarily far right, we see that this is the official approach of the state of Israel, to manage the situation, not to try to put an end to it, but to manage it. And what we understood, and I think a lot of people here as well understood, is that after the 7th of October, it is impossible to keep managing this conflict. It is impossible to keep living in this way. The only problem is that people probably still didn't understand that this is the main issue, and we're still thinking and we're still living on the 7th of October with the big trauma that it generated. One of the things, of course, is the issue with the hostages, that after 420 days, there are still 101 hostages in Gaza, and this is something that it has a lot of relevance for the Israeli society. But it became clear that also ending this war, stopping this war, is the only way that we can get our hostages back. And ending this war will require from everyone, from our side and from the Palestinians, a compromise for a political solution.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I want to take it one part at a time. And there's one question that I want to ask about peace. I'm very much interested in this concept or idea. I see people have very different ideas related to what peace means. And I was wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more, in your view, what peace looks like. And as you mentioned, also, people in Israel have different views. So if you can give us a sense of the various trends of how peace is envisioned in Israeli society.
Well, I will quote one of my favorites. I will quote Spinoza, who said that peace is not the absence of war, but it is a virtue or a state of mind or whatever else he wrote. And it is true. People here tend to believe that peace is the absence of war, but it is not correct. And I always surprised when I read and I hear people saying that before the 7th of October, we had peace. And this is an incredibly, I think, misguided conception of what happened before the 7th of October. The fact that we were not at war or an open war like we are today, it doesn't mean that we had peace before. So people tend to imagine, especially the younger generations here, that peace is when you do not have war. But peace is not that. And one of the things is that we always try also to highlight this fact through campaignings and other things, is that peace always has, or we always need to pay a price for peace. And the fact that we sign a peace agreement with a country, if it's Egypt, Jordan, I hope in the future Palestine as well, we will always have problems and issues, and there might be things that we would feel, okay, why we sacrifice so much for this peace? But at the end, we will always see, and we always be able to prove that peace is a security asset for our country. And this is clear, for example, with our relation with Egypt. Even though Egyptians might not love us and Israelis might not love Egyptian people, I love Egyptian people and I love every person. but that exists. We know that our border with Egypt is secure, even though we can have some case that something happened there. The reason why 1 year ago, we're talking today, it's the 25th of November, 1 year ago, hostages were released through Egypt. And it was because Egypt was a part of that deal that hostages were able to pass and to come back to Israel from Gaza. The same with Jordan. When we had the attack from Iran coming here, Jordan was part of this coalition that was protecting our territory, and many others examples more. So I think that people always want to believe in absolute terms of what the meaning of peace is and war, but it will be impossible to push for a solution that will bring peace without saying and telling what are the prices that we'll need to pay to get there. And I think we're very, very far away from that point right now because, as I mentioned before, because of the trauma that the Israeli society is going through, and also because it's something that is really hard to imagine, especially after the 7th of October, but also before the 7th of October. The fact that it was not an issue doesn't mean that it didn't exist before. And we need to start walking toward the path of peace, and we cannot do that without the first step, that is recognizing the right from the other side to exist, as we expect from Palestinians and from other people from other countries to recognize our right to exist, our right to self-determination. We also have a lot of work to do in order to convince the majority of Israelis that also Palestinians have the right to exist. Also Palestinians have the right to security, and also Palestinians have the right to self-determination. When we get to that point, everything will become easier, but still there is a lot of work to do to get there.
And that reminds me that in my last visit to Israel, I was in Beersheba, and there was a demonstration. And it was very interesting, the sort of backlash that one of the speakers got the moment this person introduced the question of occupation as the main issue. And the backlash came not only from sort of the anti-protesters, let's put it that way, that were organized by a right-wing organization, but also from some member of the same crowd. And so that gave me the sense of how hard is to, talk about peace in a sort of in a large way. And this is the other question I wanted to ask. So in your view, who and what are the major obstacles? First, for a ceasefire in Gaza, and also for a more durable peace, for a more comprehensive idea of reconciliations and peace?
Well, I think the answer to that question is very clear. At least it's something that I constantly think about. The main reason why we are not able to reach, first of all, a ceasefire in Gaza that will bring a hostage deal, and after some kind of path toward a political solution, is the lack of leadership. And this is probably the source of all the problems that we have, politically speaking. We have seen how since the 90s, we were actually led by one man, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the exact description of the anti-leader, someone who is everything that a leader is not, and the opposite. And when we thought about it, we start to think that what Netanyahu and his government and the right wing is offering to the Israeli people, and the Israeli people are agreeing to that, is that we will need to live constantly at war. We will need to live in a way that we will always have a situation where another 7th of October will become real. And this is something that is very dangerous, because here you play with the traumas and with the suffering of the people that naturally they will react in a way that, okay, if they want to kill us, we must kill them too. There is no space here for both of us. They hate us, they want us out, they don't want us here, so we do the same. We hate them, we don't want them here, we eliminate them. And this is something that it's really impacting the way I think that things are going right now. In the short term, concerning the situation in Gaza, that is a war that it's you can define it as a war of complete destruction, what Israel is waging there for more than 1 year already. And the aims are becoming even clearer. This is something also that we were saying from the very beginning. If the war is justified or not, it does not change the fact that what the government did with this war and our leadership did with this war did not bring any security for anyone here. Did not bring any security for Palestinians, of course, and did not bring any security for Israelis. And instead of focusing on restoring security, they're focusing right now in building new settlements in Gaza over the bodies of the hostages and over what remains from Gaza, that it was once a place and now it is not anymore.
And I want to ask you again something about Israeli society, since you can certainly have a better view than mine from Chicago. Reading the news, looking at social media, and I always tell friends, colleagues, and also listeners that I try to get out of this echo chamber on social media and really read and listen to anybody, even things that literally get on my nerves. But I think it's important to get out and understand what's going on. So one has the impressions that Israelis are not really interested in peace at this moment. And you mentioned a few things in passing, and I was wondering, what is your view of this assessment?
I think that it's quite precise. I would not say that right now the Israeli society is a society now that is seeking peace, reconciliation, and a different future. But having said that, I must say also that if we look at different examples in the past, I will just take, not because I want to compare, but I think that it's something that we can use in order to understand, is that what happened after 73, after the Yom Kippur War. And I think if I would not be on a podcast back then because they didn't exist. But if I will be speaking or being interviewed there, and I will say that in 1974, there is a possibility of signing a peace agreement with Egypt, probably I will be censored, or this interview will not be published because they will think this person is insane. And I think that also someone, if he was interviewed in 1975, would say also the same. But 3 years after that, in 78 and 79, we've seen that Sadat, a couple of days ago, we had the anniversary as well of Sadat coming to Jerusalem, giving a speech in the Knesset, and then after signing the peace agreements with Egypt, something that it stands still today. I'm not saying that this is the exact same situation, but what I want to say here through this example is that these situations always can change. And one of the factors that really influenced this change back then in the 70s, and you can see also there are polls that in 76, I don't know if 20% of the people supported a peace agreement with Egypt. Then in 77, it increased. And then in 78, when it became real, it increased. And then in 79, it already was over 50%. So what I'm trying to say is that if we get the leadership we deserve, a real leadership that will care about our security and not about messianic ideas and aims, we'll have a better chance that maybe in a couple of years, the majority of Israelis will also want to reach some kind of peace agreement with Palestinians. I'm not saying here that most of Israelis are against that. I would say that the majority essentially would prefer, of course, to live in peace, to have the possibility to raise their children, even not to send them to the army. But when this reality is not even, it's impossible to imagine. So we'll have a majority that will still think this way. But in the future, if there will be a big political shift, and I'm not sure that that can happen, but I hope, because at the end, this is the only way we have to deal with the current situation, to hope for a better future, for a better outcome. I think that then it will be possible, yes, to think about possibility for peace, for security. And I believe that most of Israelis, even left wing, right wing, or whatever it is, will start to think in that way. But we have a long process till then.
I want to ask about political forces, political parties, but there's one thing that I want to discuss with you earlier. Obviously, sitting in America, I can see the influence and the power of Israeli lobbies, not only through the American and Western countries' political systems, but also through and upon Jewish communities. And this is something that I've experienced personally. I've seen people that were certainly in favor of peace after October 7th, taking a completely different stance and moving away. So I was wondering to what extent Jewish communities and Israel supporters and Israeli organizations abroad have an impact on how Israelis perceive peace, and also in relation, for instance, to your organization's Peace Now, because obviously it's easy to read on social media comments towards your and other organizations, being labeled as traitor and whatever you can add to that list of words.
Well, this is something we didn't grow up here, and born in Uruguay. I am familiar with the situation of the Jewish communities in what we call the diaspora. And of course, I agree with you, Roberto, when you say that after the 7th of October, there was a big shift, especially in the Jewish communities abroad. Movements and people who truly believe in the possibility of peace got convinced that this is impossible, that after this terrible massacre, there will not be a way to forgive or to get into some kind of understanding in the future. But I feel that this is changing slowly back to what we had before in a different way. But if you see, for example, different organizations or movements that right after the 7th of October were focusing mostly on what here the right wing will be focusing. So slowly you will see some kind of shift towards, for example, and this is the first thing, the first channel, that is the pressure for a hostage deal and for ending the war. And this is something that came first from the families of the hostages. I think that it took some months, I think 4 or 5 months since the war started, that they always started to hear the first voices calling for a ceasefire. Maybe not as we hear in other countries around the world with the protests, the ceasefire protests, but it was a legitimate call here in Israel. And this slowly started to reach also other communities. I'm talking about the US Jewish community, in Canada as well, and in other places in Europe, where this was a valid call. Of course, together with the release of with a hostage deal for our hostages as well. And I think that this is how it normally goes. First, these voices here in Israel that are the minority, we were among them. Many other organizations were among them, calling for an end to the war. but we didn't feel sure enough. And I'm talking here as representing an Israeli organization, a very well-known organization here, not for the young generation, mostly for the older generations, but still, that it was hard for us also to get some clear demand and position regarding to the war at the very beginning. And I can imagine also how hard it was in other countries to get a clear standing regarding the war. And what you mentioned before, all the process of demonization that NGOs here in Israel went through, including ours and many, many others, that we are traitors, that we hate our country, that we serve foreign interests, and many, many other things, that we are actually against the security interests or other things here in Israel. This is also a fear that you can feel in other Jewish communities. And I know this because I talk to people that they feel in that way, that they feel that they cannot go through, or they cannot go against the mainstream position. And the mainstream position is to stand constantly and without any doubt with Israel. So the thing is, and I think this is important for every person who is listening to us, especially if he's a part of any Jewish community in the world, is that there are two options here. You can stand with Israel, with the government of Israel, and this is your right. You can support Smotrich, you can support Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu, and all the people who are responsible for our current situation and for the 7th of October and many other things. Or you can stand with the people of Israel. That the people shown from the very beginning of this war and even before that this government has no any popular support. We're talking about 70% of the people who are constantly were and will be against this government for different reasons. So I think that the first thing we need to break is that construction, that standing with Israel or supporting Israel, and I understand the reasons behind that. It's a very important theme in the way that Jewish communities work in the diaspora, is not necessarily standing with the government. It's quite the opposite. I don't think that we can bring another government that was or that acted and is still acting, sadly, in this anti-Israeli way, anti-human way. And I hope that every Jewish person abroad will consider this, at least, and not automatically stand for different things that at the end they're hurting us, they're hurting Israelis, and they're hurting also the other people that live here, if it's Palestinians and the region as well.
And I want to go back to politics because I guess we can safely say that the travesty of many political parties, certainly the Likud, that on one end pay lip service to the idea of a two-state solution, but eventually became clear that they're not interested in that. Certainly not the messianic or right-wing parties. So I was wondering, are there still political forces in Israel that are really and genuinely interested in a two-state solution?
I hope my answer will be different, but I must say, given the current circumstances here, is that not really. And the majority of the political map here, I will not even mention the right-wing parties because we already know what is their position. That is, it is clear that I think it's an advantage, but it is clear that they want one Jewish state or one state of Jewish supremacy from the river to the sea. And this, I'm not saying this, I'm just saying what members of this government are saying in a very open way. But sadly, for everyone, there is no real opposition to this idea. And naturally, the opposition to this idea will be a political solution that will be a two-state solution. Of course, you can also think that at the end, one state is the only solution, and everyone here from the river to the sea need to have or deserve equal rights. That's also something that it exists, but it doesn't exist in the political map. But the problem is that also those who were pushing for a two-state solution in the past, the political leadership, they are not really using that. And I clearly understand what is the reason for this. And the reason is that talking about a two-state solution is not something that is attractive for the Israeli public. And this is a very big problem for politicians, because just what a politician wants, he wants both, he wants support. And if you already know that if you talk about the conflict, if you talk about the occupation, if you talk about the situation in the West Bank, if you talk about Gaza, if you talk about other issues that are day-to-day issues for Israelis and that are very important, they will lose, because what they have to offer is not attractive as what the right wing has to offer. That is occupation, annexation, security, how they call it. I don't see in that any security, but the opposite. But that's what we have right now. So if we think about, for example, center or right center parties, I don't know how to define them anymore. But if we think about Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid or or other political leaders from the opposition, you will not hear a very clear call for a political solution. You will hear maybe that in the future, in the very distant future, we will need, yes, a political solution, but till then, we'll have more of the same. Recently, and also some months ago, Benny Gantz, the leader of the White and Blue Party, he said that we will need to fight, and our kids will need to fight in Gaza, saying that for many years we will remain there. So what's the alternative? When I see, for example, many people here in Israel, part of what we call the liberal camp, that is not the same than the peace camp. Yeah, it's much wider, and it includes also people from the right wing. They see in Naftali Bennett, the former director of the Yesha Council, who is very clear with his positions. It's not that he's really hiding them. They see him as a potential leader, as a potential prime minister. He was already, and we saw what was the result as well, that will bring something different to our country and to the situation. And it is clear that it will be more of the same. And this, I think, shows in a very clear way how we lack leadership, we lack brave politicians, brave leaders who will tell the truth to the people and stop lying and stop selling illusions that we will get security, we will get a better future if we keep waging this war, if we keep pushing for annexation, if we keep occupying the Palestinians. And this is not true. I hope in the future we'll see a real leader, or I hope she will be a she, that will say that this is not true, that the only alternative is a political solution, a diplomatic solution, because this is the only solution.
I want to complicate things further, and I want to draw the attention of the listeners to a report that was published last October by Peace Now, War and Annexation, How the Israeli Government Changed the West Bank During the First Year of War. Because obviously, it looks like we forgot that there's still occupation and there's an ongoing operation by the Israeli government, not only through police and military means, but also of creation of new settlements. The latest one is in Bet Safafa. So there's a lot of stuff happening. But I want to couple this with the recent elections in America. So it looks like now the White House with Trump may allow a possible annexation of the West Bank and part of Gaza, and essentially give way to the settlers and messianic parties to achieve their goals. And I was wondering, what is your take on this possible and realistic scenarios, given that the appointee to become the next American ambassadors in Israel is effectively Mike Huckabee, who is an evangelical and for many years, for decades, not only denies the presence of Palestinians, but also encourage annexations of the West Bank?
So first of all, I think the report we release depict in a very good way what is the aim and what is the path that this government chose when it took power in December 2022. And it is the path toward annexation. And what we are seeing right now, and we tend to wait for that moment where all our ministers will sit on a table and will declare, okay, now officially the West Bank has been annexed to Israel. It is a part of Israel. And this is actually what we're seeing, but without the press conference, without this event. Because Israel is annexing the West Bank. Clearly, without any doubt. They can say that no, that it is still not officially annexed, that it wasn't de jure. But what we're seeing, all the changes, also the structural, but also the changes on the ground, are leading us to a one-state reality that it exists before, but now it's becoming official. So when we see what is happening in the United States and with this new administration, and yes, of course, we need to take into account that the next ambassador, I'm not sure if he will move the embassy from Jerusalem, but he will move it to Efrat or to another settlement. I hope that will not happen, but I think that's something that can happen. But besides that, we see that the new administration, Trump's administration, will not do anything to oppose this. Yes, if we had some expectation from, for example, Biden's administration with all the sanctions, I must say also a couple of weeks ago, Amana, probably the biggest settler organization, was sanctioned by the US. Sadly, it was sanctioned a couple of months before this administration is getting out from the White House, but still, we will see that they will not do anything to oppose this situation. But there are some ways that we might find some kind of possibility for some kind of political agreement. And I cannot say because, and I don't think anyone can say, because Trump is a very volatile person and we don't know what is going to happen. But if Saudi Arabia will intervene and will, for example, demand a Palestinian state if they want normalization with Israel, so maybe we'll see some kind of possibility for a political solution, but that's all. That's pretty much all. If we look at the reality on the ground, the situation has never been worse than this. And people tend to say, and I hear this a lot, that, okay, now Israel is, the government is using this war in order to finalize the annexation. But if you look at our last report from last year, you will see that the numbers maybe were a little bit lower, but the tendency was the same. Last year in 2023, for example, 12,000 housing units were promoted by the Israeli government in the occupied West Bank. This year in 2024, or since the beginning of the war, 8,000, almost 9,000 housing units were promoted. Very high numbers if we compare with the past. Since the beginning of the war till now, and this is information we get thanks to our Settlement Watch team, we see that at least 47 outposts were established. And I must say that when we publish this report, the number was 43. But this number is constantly increasing. It is important also to say, maybe people will not know, but there is a differentiation we do. It's mostly an internal one here in Israel between settlements and outposts. Settlements are legal under Israeli law, illegal under international law, of course. Outposts are illegal under both Israeli and international law. But outposts are being established constantly with the support of the government. And I'm not just saying with a symbolic support. We're talking about economic, financial, and structural support to these outposts to being established, because the plan in the future is to turn these outposts into new settlements, so the possibility for a Palestinian state will be something impossible. The territorial continuity of the future Palestinian state in the West Bank will be destroyed. So this is the plan. I'm not saying something new, probably. I think everyone can go and just Google Bezalel Smotrich or Bezalel Smotrich plan, and we'll see that this was published by him in 2017 or 18, if I remember well, where you see that this is the big plan to avoid the possibility of the establishment of a Palestinian state, and instead of that, to create a reality where we, the Jewish people, are the ones who own this land, and everyone else will have less rights than us. They can stay, but accept that reality, or they can just leave.
I have a couple of more questions, and I want to switch to the other side for what you can talk about. So, how do you see the other side, the Palestinian peace case? When we look at surveys that are coming out through a couple of different organizations, and obviously they should be taken with a pinch of salt, but it shows that even in Palestine, for a completely different set of reasons, peace is not exactly palatable at the moment, and it seems very hard to combine the two in order to, possibly move forward and find a common path towards, obviously, a long-term solution. So I was wondering, what do you see, and how do you also work in relation to the other?
Well, this is I think it's a very complex situation we have right now. And I think that the complexity of the situation has its source on the fact that we tend to think that we are equals, that both sides are equals. And the truth is that we are not equals. There is a side, our side, who is the occupier, and there is another side who is the occupied. Terrible things were made from both sides. Yeah, we saw that on the 7th of October. We saw that from the Palestinian side also with the terror attacks and other things. And terrible things were made since the 7th of October, and before that, and after, and now. So the illusion, I think that a lot of people ask, and then I get this question all the time, okay, so where are the Palestinian voices for peace? The illusion that people have, I think it's something that it's impossible to get into that situation where Palestinians will be, for some way or for some reason, they will be calling for peace with the Israelis, and they will become into this kind of, hippies, that the only thing they want is peace. It's something impossible that we cannot expect. And I think that the first step towards that is from our part, from the Israeli side, to show that we are ready for that. We are ready to give up to part of our land or to part of this land. I don't think it's ours. I don't think it's theirs. This is land. Some people believe that this is the Holy Land, so this land might belong to God, not to us. People who don't believe in that should think that land does not belong to anyone. We just live here, and there is a reality, and we need to deal with this reality. And I try to put myself on their position. And when you see that what you get from the other side. And this is also something that we included in our report, and I think it's important also to highlight. When you see the hundreds, if not say thousands, of cases of settler terrorism against Palestinians, innocent Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, that almost none of them, according to numbers from Yeshdin, another organization working against the occupation, that says that most of them, they are not even investigated by the police or the army. When you hear about thousands of Palestinians being displaced due to settler terrorism since the beginning of the war, I will not even tell you what happened before. When you see that Palestinians have restrict access to their land, that they cannot work freely what it belonged to them, the way that they have to get money and to be financially stable. When you see that demolitions are in the West Bank are only against Palestinians, almost not for Jews, not for settlers. When you see that almost, or even more already, 20 communities, Palestinian communities in the West Bank, were displaced for different reasons since the beginning of the war. So how we can ask a people, a society, that what they see from the Israeli side, there is only two things. One thing is the military, because at the end, Palestinians, they know Israelis, but they know them when they're wearing green clothes, or when they're settlers. And this is the reality that they have. So I think that one of the ways to deal with that, and this is also what we try to do, but I believe, and I must say this sincerely, I believe that there are even other organizations that are doing a much better job than us, and there are many reasons for that. When you see, for example, Israelis doing protective presence in villages in the West Bank, if it's in South Hebron Hills, in Tuani, or in other places, or in Sanuta. When you see human rights activists, Israelis, going to the West Bank, meeting Palestinians, showing them that there is people here that care about our future, that care about the future of the Israelis, but also care about the future of Palestinians. I think that's the best way to overcome this problem. Because I must say, and this I'm saying because this is my personal experience, I never, almost never, maybe in some case, but never got attacked by Palestinians in the West Bank, not in Jerusalem, because I'm Israeli, because I'm a Jew, or for any other reason. Quite the opposite. I was almost every time welcome in a very warm way. And I always bring this example that I just thought about it a couple of weeks ago. Back in July 2023, Peace Now organized a joint march with Israelis and Palestinians, and this was before the 7th of October. And we managed to bring almost 400 Israelis to the West Bank to protest against the establishment of an outpost, that is the outpost of Homesh, on the lands of the private lands of the village of Burka in the northern West Bank. And we developed very good ties and relation with them, with the people from Burka. We visited them before, and everything was very nice. And the day of the march, when we got already all the people ready to march together with Palestinians, when Palestinians were waiting us in their village, in Burka, with signs, with food, with water, with everything. So we were attacked by the army, by the Israeli army, because they declared that this area was military close. And stun grenades were thrown against us. We had all people, part of the peace camp, sadly, not sadly, but this is the reality, is mostly people from older ages. We're seeing now more young people also joining, but this is a good thing. So all people were heard. And the people who helped us to overcome with this situation, because some of us did not have experience in this kind of things, in this kind of action, organizing these kind of actions, were the Palestinians themselves. They brought the cars and they took us and they kind of saved us for what was happening there. And I will never forget that, because at the end, for the big majority of the people here, and I want to leave aside what politicians are trying to sell us, both from our side and both from the Palestinian side, that the other side is evil, that the other side wants to destroy us. I think that for the majority of the people, at the end, what we care about is about the humanity of the other side. And when the other side shows you compassion, you also want to show compassion to the other side. And I know as a fact that a lot of people that took part in this march that were not really people that they are used to go to the West Bank. For some of them, it was the first time. They were just part of the wider protest movement, so they see this as an opportunity to see a different reality. For some of them, this was actually a traumatic experience, but this was a good experience because they saw that Palestinians from the other side are also humans. They also care about us, and the division is not between Israelis and Palestinians. The division should be people who believe in equality, people who believe in freedom, people who believe in equal rights to everyone, and people who believe the opposite.
One last question. Is there anything that we didn't talk about, but you would like to discuss and add to our conversation?
Well, I think that one of the questions I would like to address is how we get there, how we stop the current process that is a self-destructive process for us and is a destructive process also for the Palestinians, how we get there, how we can find some hope in all this darkness. And I think that the best way to get there is just to think about other cases in history where most of the people thought that it was impossible. For example, it was impossible that Germans and French will stop fighting. Or it was impossible that the Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda will stop fighting. Or it was impossible that in Ireland, for example, or in other places, I can say also from my home place, from South America, also, I don't know, that Argentinians and Brazilians will stop fighting or will stop fighting against Paraguayans or other things. And in every conflict, in every war, even there is always difference, there is a way and there is a need to get into some kind of solution. And this solution will take time. Yeah, I'm not saying that in 5 years we'll have the solution, maybe in 50 years, to quote Herzl, who was talking about the creation of a Jewish state or a national home for the Jewish people. I think that this is the only way we have to believe that a political solution is possible. And even though our government and our current leadership is taking us to a way that the end road will be complete destruction for Palestinians and for Israelis as well, there will always be an alternative and there will be a time for this alternative. So I want to, maybe this is not the most optimistic thing to do, but I think that we can quote here my favorite writer in the Bible, who is the writer of the Ecclesiastes, who wrote very, I think in a very human way, that there is always a time for war and there is a time for peace and there is nothing new under the sun.
This was Mauricio Lapchik, Director of External Relations at Peace Now, Shalom Akshav. Perhaps, Mauricio, we also need given your Uruguayan background, what you call the garra charrua, a spirit of strength that may bring us to this new path. Mauricio, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Roberto.
This podcast is being produced by Roberto Mazza and is published on all major platforms. Make sure to send your recommendation if you want me to interview someone connected to Israel, Palestine, and Jerusalem. Also, please follow us on our new social media page at Blue Sky Up under Jerusalem Unplugged Podcast. The Twitter or X account will be deactivated on January 1st, 2025.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Jerusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.